welcome to the very first session of our virtual part of the Newburyport Literary Festival. This is has been our first hybrid festival. Friday and Saturday, we were here in Newburyport, Massachusetts, which, if you don't know, is on the North Shore of Massachusetts, and we're back in person for the first time in 3 years, and we were so pleased, and we're pleased to have you all here. And so this is our fourth time on doing our virtual events. And I want to just shout out our sponsors. The Institute for Savings and the Newburyport Bank have made this event possible since 2005, and we really appreciate their support. The Massachusetts Cultural Council and chapters in Georgetown, Newburyport, West Newbury, Newbury, and Amesbury have helped us out, so we appreciate that. We had so many individual donors come out this year, and also the Yellow School and the Mass Center for the Book, and we really appreciate all of that support. Thank you so much. Now I am going to introduce our illustrious speaker. We're thrilled to have with us today Melissa Joulwan and David Humphreys, who are the co-creators of Strong Sense of Place, a podcast and website dedicated to armchair travel and books with vivid settings. Each episode of their show focuses on one destination. They discuss what makes that place different from anywhere else, and then recommend 5 books that took them there on the page. They're introverts who love travel, adventures, and exploring new places. In 2017, they sold almost all of their stuff and moved from the US to Prague in the Czech Republic with their laptops and their cat Smudge. They're joining us from there today. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
They are going to introduce to our other illustrious speaker, Amy. Thank you all again.
Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, we're super excited today to have Amy Tector with us. She's the author of The Honeybee Emeralds and the Dominion Archive Mystery Series. She is also an archivist/archivist. We're going to talk about that at Canada's National Archives. We will be covering all of that and more. Amy, thank you so much for being our guest on our virtual show today.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, thank you. And it's a thrill for me because, as I've told you, I am a huge fan of your podcast and just delighted to be here.
Oh, that's so nice of you.
Yeah, we're going to have fun today. So everybody, I know it's early.
Yeah, first,
relax.
Yeah,
Maybe
thanks for being here.
PJs even.
Yeah. It's 3 here and it feels early. I can only imagine what 9 feels like. We're on the East Coast there or earlier.
California people, anybody? 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just going to jump right in. For people who are not familiar with our show, we have the same format each time. I do a 101, which is like an overview of whatever the subject is today. It's archives. And then Dave leads a round of 2 truths and a lie. Yeah. And then we get into book recommendations. And because we're fortunate enough to have Amy with us today,
that's us.
We're going to have a little discussion about her book, Speak for the Dead.
There's Amy's book. Whoop. There's Amy's book. There's the agenda Mel just walked us through. Feel good about the whole thing. Are we going on?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's get started with the 101.
Okay, first, Amy, I need you to weigh in on something.
Absolutely.
My entire life have pronounced the word archivist, but now I think I'm supposed to be saying archivist. So yeah, expert that you are.
I hate to do this, but archivist. But many people say archivist, but it is wrong. So
I love that you didn't candy coat that at all. Yep. You could not be more wrong. All right, well,
I tell you what, we're just happy as a profession that somebody is saying the word archivist, because it's not always a well understood profession. So if you want to call us archivists, that's fine too. We will happily take it.
Okay, I think
even if you're wrong.
And while we've got you in the hot seat, we civilians use the word library and archive pretty interchangeably, I think. That's pretty common. But there are some significant differences. So do you want to tell us what those are so that we can pronounce it correctly and know what we're talking about?
Yeah, for sure. And this is super common, and I'm very happy to talk about it. Most people, I would say everybody knows what a library is, because we've all been in a public library at one point or other. So we all understand library has books. You can go there, you can say, I'm interested in books about cats, and a wonderful librarian or the databases will help you find all the books about cats that you want. You can go home, read up about your cat. And archives, and so essentially the difference between archives and a library is I get so excited. Libraries are for published material. Archives are for unpublished. That's like the central difference.
Oh.
But what that means is that archives get organized in a very different way from libraries. And anyone who's doing research in archives the first time often have a really sort of unpleasant shock as they realize that you can't search by subject and you can't usually search by keyword, because the vast majority of archives are still analog, still on paper, and will never be digitized and will never be keyword searchable. So the Google search that we're so used to, that keyword search, is not possible in an archives. And that's because it's unpublished material. And so what that means is that you and I each have our own archives, and that is the emails that we send, the texts that we receive, the photos that we take, the photo albums that we have, the love letters on paper that we have written. All of that forms our archives, and every person has their own archive. If you are significant enough, if you've done something interesting or been part of something interesting, it's possible that an archive will want to acquire that. They'll want to acquire the Amy Tector collection. And when they do that, it means acquiring my emails and my letters and my baby photos and my swim medals and all of that material. So it's a very miscellaneous collection of stuff that can't be described with just a simple subject the way you would in a library by saying Amy Tector's material is about cats, because it's not. It's about cats, but it's about swim meets. And so there are different, more complicated, more intensive ways to search that stuff. And if you think about your own archives as well, sure, some of that stuff you would be able to put a keyword search in and then find all the emails that I had sent about swim meets, but you wouldn't be able to find all my earlier stuff from when I was younger and writing in my diary about swim meets. For that, you would have to order in my one original diary, the only one that exists, don't do that, and read it to find out what I thought about my thoughts on swim meets. And so that's the other big difference between libraries and archives, is that archives contain, their collections are generally unique. So there's only one of them usually in the world of the thing. There's only one of my diaries in the world. And so if you want to see the original, you have to come to Ottawa and rifle through my vaults, again, don't, to find that diary.
I don't know, that sounded like an invitation to me.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah. Put her home.
So
Take
I
your
can't
cats.
emphasize that enough.
I have 2 follow-up questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Objects. So most of the things you talked about are bits of paper, right? And I know that film is part of an archive. Is it correct to say, I was looking at different kinds of archives online, and there was one that was called an archive that is jewelry from Hollywood. It's a collection of jewelry that isn't open to the public, but I guess you can make an appointment to go and look at it. So is it appropriate to call that an archive? It's filled with pieces of jewelry, there's no papers.
So generally, I would categorize that more as a museum of jewelry rather than an archive. So it's all fuzzy, but generally an archive is documentary material, but that it doesn't have to be paper, and it doesn't have to be, digital documents. It can be photographs, it can be film, maps are often included, but stuff that carries information on it. Okay. As opposed to an object like a necklace that you can't necessarily read in the same way. So that's the distinction. And normally archives are set up, they have the specialists to preserve the thing that they collect. So if it's a film archives, they'll have conservators who know how to preserve film long-term. And if it's an archive that specializes in textual material, they'd have a textual paper conservators or digital, people who are good at migrating digital stuff and preserving the digital over the long term.
Okay, that makes sense. Last follow-up. you mentioned that when people go into archives, sometimes they're surprised because it's challenging to find the things that they would expect because of the way you have to search for them. Does that mean that you have a different relationship with as a person wanting to use these materials? Is the relationship with the archivist different than, say, with a librarian? Because it sounds like an archivist might have to guide you more through the materials or point you in the right direction more than say a librarian who can take you to the card catalog and be like, here you go. I don't know. I'm asking.
Yeah, for sure. That is often what happens. When I started my career, I was a reference archivist. So my job was to help people who walked in the door or wrote us and said, we're looking for the specific thing. And then I would help them. I wouldn't help them necessarily find the thing. I would help them figure out how to find the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the difference, because it's more complicated to search, and each request is a little bit different. Maybe you have to go and look in old card catalogs for this particular, for the record of the aircraft accident that you're trying to find, or maybe there are old ledgers for soldiers of the First World War, and you have to leaf through, you have to sort of scroll through the ledgers to figure out which box to order to get the case file of the soldier that you want to see. So each request is very unique. It's not good, but each request is unique. So often a reference archivist is kind of necessary, especially at the beginning, and then people figure it out and go, and that's what we want to encourage as autonomy. But it's not obvious always how to do the research.
Okay, all of this is catnip to me. This is awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to give you a break from talking and take up the mantle of the 101. So, as we've discussed, archives cover lots of materials. There are different categories of archives. So, and Amy, you are welcome to chime in if I get something wrong or you want to embellish with anything. There are historical, national, cultural, all kinds of special collections. I made reference to that jewelry archive. Somebody said that was an archive. There are also archives at universities. Newspapers have them. Corporations have them. I can only imagine what the Disney archive must look like. It'd be fun to get in there.
Yeah.
And then cultural institutions like museums and libraries also have them, which is why I think sometimes the line between what's an archive and a museum and a library gets really blurry, because some of those institutions have all three of those things. For example, in the United States, we have the National Archive. There it is. There's the outside. It looks very majestic. Let's take a look on the inside, Dave. Less majestic. This is the official records keeper of the US government. They are tasked with preserving all of the government documents, stuff like papers, maps, film reels, emails. I believe that the Library of Congress is trying to preserve and catalog tweets, which is terrifying.
I read that. They have done that.
Yeah. So it's basically everything associated with the course of doing federal business. As things shift out of importance, they get rid of them. They only end up keeping 1 to 3% of all of the stuff. And that is still more than 10 billion records. Billion. That kind of stresses me out. There are also state archives that do something similar, but that's on the state level. Now I want to talk about a couple of cultural archives that I discovered. If you go to Wikipedia, which is the most basic, simplest place to start, obviously, there's a huge list of archives. And from there, it kind of gives you ideas for things you can search for if you want to really take a deep dive into finding different archives. There's the Black Archives of Mid-America. There's the Lesbian Herstory Archives. Looks like a nice comfy place to spend the afternoon. And there's the Archives of the History of American Psychology at the University of Akron. They have a bunch of papers and a bunch of stuff, which looks really fun, and I would love to get in there. Basically, if there is a topic that you are interested in or passionate about or want to really go down the rabbit hole, there's probably a treasure trove of stuff somewhere about it. And the ones we've talked about are just in the United States. So I thought I would share 3 others from around the world that I found particularly interesting. If you're a Bronte fan, you can visit the library, which also has an archive at the Bronte Parsonage in Haworth, England. That is a magnifying glass pointed at one of Charlotte Bronte's tiny little books that she wrote when she was a child.
Written in Charlotte Bronte's tiny little handwriting.
Mm-hmm. They're so small. It's kind of hard to tell from that picture. They're only about the size of a business card. So you can imagine how tiny the handwriting is. If you wanted to see one of Charlotte's original letters to her friend Ellen or the tiny book, this is the place to do it. They have the biggest collection of handwritten manuscripts and letters by all of the Bronte family members. So Patrick Bronte, he was the father, his sermons, all that kind of stuff. This is Anne Dinsdale sitting in the library working her magical Bronte witchcraft. Okay, I'm just checking my notes. I think that's all I had to, oh, I know what else I want to say about the Bronte Parsonage. Regular people can go into that library. So you could go in there, say hi to Anne Dinsdale, look at the books on the shelves. If you would like to examine some of their more precious documents, their one-of-a-kind archival documents, you can fill out a form, tell them what you want to see and why, and if you get approved, they will invite you into the library and show you that item from the archive, which is very exciting if you're a Bronte nerd.
Yeah.
I don't know any of those. Okay, the next place we're going to talk about is a little bit sad, but also awesome. It's the Yad Vashem Archive and Museum in Israel. This is a World Holocaust Remembrance Center. It was started in 1953, and I want to read you this quote: "To collect, examine, and publish testimony of the disaster and the heroism it called forth." So this is the big entry hall that you go into when you go in the museum. But the archive has a lot of deep materials. They have written and videotaped testimony from people who survived the Holocaust. They have documents, photographs, films, and these are all available to scholars and to civilians. If you're trying to research someone in your family who was lost in the Holocaust, this is the place you can go, but you can also do it online. And I found out about this place in a very strange way. I learned about it in a spy thriller by Daniel Silva, the Gabriel Allon series. Gabriel is a master spy. He and his team need to use the archives frequently in their work. And that's how I found out about this amazing resource, and then did more research and found out, of course, it's a real place that is doing just incredible, important work. Do I have to skip my last one, or should I just hurry?
I mean, you really need to hurry.
Okay, the last one is super fun. I'm going to talk about it really, really quickly. This woman is Miss Frank E. Butolph. In 1887, she decided she wanted to start collecting menus. And over the course of the next few years, she collected thousands and thousands of restaurant menus that she donated to the New York Public Library in 1899. That collection now has 25,000 menus in it. Most of them are digitized, so you can go onto the New York Public Library website and see this archive. Again, I don't want to blur the lines. This is an archive of menus that's part of the library. The way she got them is she wrote letters to the restaurants and requested them. If they didn't respond to her letter, she marched herself into the restaurant in person and asked for the menu. And then she also put ads in trade publications. There was a magazine called The Caterer that was for restaurants and hotels. And as she advertised and she kind of gained more notoriety, restaurants would just spontaneously send her their menus. So there's a huge collection now. Chefs and cookbook authors use them for research, but we civilians can also see them. And I picked out one that I thought was really cute. There it is. I like to pretend I live in turn of the century New York or San Francisco and look at what I might eat if I went out to my lunch with my ladies who lunch.
For a quarter.
For a quarter.
Yeah.
All right, that ends my Archives 101. We'll be able to talk about more of that stuff when we talk to Amy about Speak for the Dead.
Okay. That brings us to Two Truths and a Lie. This is a part of the show where I say three statements. Two of them are true, one of them is not. Typically, Mel doesn't know which one is true, the lie. Today, she knows which one is the lie, but you don't. So we're going to go through this, and then I'm going to give you a link, and you can guess which one you think is the lie. Okay, so let's start with the National Archives. The National Archives, we just talked about it. It's the official archive of the United States government. It preserves and provides access to the federal government's records. You probably got that from the name. They have original copies of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence and a whole bunch of other very cool things. But here's a statement. So they have become great, but they started very humble. The statement is, the National Archives began as the United States House Committee on the Disposition of Useless Executive Papers.
So rude.
That's statement one. Statement two. So while we're talking about the National Archives, they have a remarkably robust gift shop. You wouldn't think, I wouldn't think. And that's true, they do. You can go to their site and you can purchase all kinds of things, from bound copies of founding documents to busts of great Americans to posters with patent illustrations. Here is the statement. For $89.95, the National Archives will sell you a working replica of Eli Whitney's cotton gin. And then finally, Beyonce, living pop legend Beyonce, is an archivist. Archivist?
Archivist.
Yes.
Amy
She
has spoken.
studies her own life. Here is the statement. Beyonce has a camera crew that follows her 18 hours a day, every day, since 2005. Okay, so here is, if you want to play along, I just put the link in the chat. If you want to follow that and vote for which one you think is the lie, I'll give you a minute or two we'll see if this works. I've never done this before. People are voting in chat.
That's fine too.
That'll work, yeah.
Oh, you guys are going to be so surprised. I love it. I love it.
All right. Number 2 is the lie. Oop, hey, look, somebody voted. There, and they're there. All right, so let's move on. So.
One at a time.
One at a time, yep, one at a time and in order. The first one, the National Archives began as the United States. Oh, look at that, I made a graphic. Okay, the National Archives began as the United States House Committee on the Disposition of Useless Executive Papers. That is true. Way back in 1889, the U.S. still had a Wild West then. The Eiffel Tower had just gone up. In 1889, the History of Representatives, they had a problem. They had too many papers. They had filing cabinet after filing cabinet and room after room and agency after agency, just way too much paper. And maybe they should just throw it away, but maybe those files are important or of historical interest. Yeah, I'm a 19th century bureaucrat and every word I say is really important. Prove me wrong. So the House fixed this problem with an act. It was, quote, an act to authorize and provide for the disposition of useless papers in the executive departments. Each agency was required to submit its potentially useless papers to an appointed subcommittee. That subcommittee would meet to agree that the documents were indeed useless and then sell them or burn them. That eventually, sell them for scrap, that eventually was institutionalized as the Select Committee on the Disposition of Useless Executive Papers, which, oh, I love that. They were appointed each term. And it wasn't until 1934 that they got a little smarter and hired an archivist of the United States, which was both smarter and sexier. And that became the basis for the National Archive. I think I have, oh yeah, look at that. There's a document. One of the reports from the disposition of useless papers. Okay, so next statement. For the National Archives, we'll sell you a working model of Eli Whitney's 1794 cotton gin. So you can buy a lot of interesting things at the National Archives. I'm going to tell you a little story about that first, though. In the 17 and 1800s, there were no staples or paper clips. Those weren't invented until the early 1900s. So the US government officials bound their documents with tape, with red tape. And so when you hear cutting through red tape, that's a reference to an office supply that nobody has used for over 100 years. And the government used a lot of it. I was shocked. For example, in 1864 alone, the War Department headquarters purchased 154 miles of red tape. Yeah. So naturally, the National Archive is still swimming in red tape. And one of the things they do is they sell it. So they've got it in pins and earrings and paperweights, all framing a little bit of ancient red tape. And those items go for between $40 and $80. If you wanted something a little more high-end from the gift shop, you can buy a replica of the Resolute desk. That is the desk in the Oval Office used by Kennedy and Reagan and Obama and a bunch of others. A replica of the Resolute will cost you about $9,000. Yep. The original Resolute weighs about 1,300 pounds. I suspect this weighs about the same. International shipping is available if you're wondering. I would love to see what the local post office would do if 1,300 pounds of wood showed up. That would be amazing. But the cotton gin, Eli Whitney's 89.95 cotton gin, I made that up. That is the lie. Which means
amazing.
Beyonce has had a camera crew that has followed her 18 hours a day, every day since 2005. That is true. Queen Bee has had her own camera crew following her for almost 20 years. And here she is thinking that I don't need to be judging her for that. And here she is in what she probably considers a house coat. And here she is taking care of business. So according to a GQ article, all of that footage is indexed and cross-referenced by an archivist and kept in a climate-controlled server farm in the middle of Manhattan.
Wow.
That archive also includes every photo, every article, every interview, and a video diary for almost 20 years. She apparently uses that information. After every show, she sits down and reviews the evening before she sleeps. She watches the show and she writes out notes for herself and for her dancers and for the cameraman, and everybody gets those notes the next morning.
And do those handwritten notes go into an archive?
I have to assume.
Wow.
The practicalities of that is staggering for me. Like a film crew 18 hours a day means that there is multiple teams of people. Holidays and sick days have to be covered, and an unending live stream of content has to be cataloged. And for every visitor she gets, there is an agreement that needs to be signed and kept so that you too can be part of Beyonce's eternal archive. Whoa.
Amazing.
Celebrities,
So
they're just like
now
us.
I'm wondering if Amy wishes that she was Beyonce.
That seems like a hard job.
Doesn't it?
It does.
You gotta love that job. Okay, that's it. That's Two Truths and a Lie. Let's talk about books.
Yeah, good job, Dave. Okay, Amy, are you ready?
I am. I'm excited.
Okay, so before we get into your book, which I'm really excited to talk about because I loved it, do you want to tell us a little bit about your job? Because you work in Canada's National Archive.
That's right. Yeah. So I work in the equivalent of the American National Archives combined with Library of Congress. So Library and Archives Canada has smooshed both those two things together up here. But yeah, so I'm currently actually not an archivist. I'm a project manager, but I started out my career and spent a long time, as I said, I was a reference archivist. So that's helping people when they send in questions, trying to help them find answers or serving them at the desk. And it was amazing because you just, somebody's looking for a lost letter that their grandmother wrote their grandfather, and then somebody else is doing a history of, spy activity during Second World War. Like it was the gamut of information. And then I spent some time as a government archivist. So then I was in charge of doing that, of making sure that those not useless records of the government came and were preserved. And that's a super interesting, tricky job, because as you said, I think you said 1% to 3% of records get acquired from the government, but I think for us, it's even lower than that. I think it's lower than 1% because there's so much material out there, and you've got to only take what you think is going to have long-term value, because otherwise there's no room to store it. And then for a while I was a photo archivist, which feeds into Speak for the Dead quite a bit. And so then I was specializing in the photography medium. So all sorts of, and then sort of more project managing, less interesting jobs, but those were the places I really got to work with the collection, and I still do occasionally, and it's the most exciting part of the job because it's boxes. That's the thing. I mean, we're acquiring more and more digital archives for sure, and there's a whole other process for how you manage and preserve long-term digital, because we know how to preserve paper. We've been doing it, from papyrus on, and if you've got good humidity controls and a dark place to put something, you can read paper 1,000 years from now. But we are still figuring out how to preserve digital, which needs to be constantly migrated, and you need machines to read it. So that's a whole other challenge that other people are working on. That's not my specialty. I'm slightly too old, I think, for it.
So let's talk about your book. For people who haven't had the good fortune to read it yet, can you just give us a description of Speak for the Dead?
Yeah, it's the second in the Dominion Archives series, but there's not a lot of overlap between the first one. So you can read Speak for the Dead without having read Foulest Things, no problem. And it features a sort of embittered, sad coroner, Kate, who is called out to an apparent suicide at a branch or a building belonging to the National Archives, the Dominion Archives in my book, that actually specializes in preserving nitrate film. And as Kate discovers, and because there has been a death, and so she is the coroner, and she's a medical doctor, has to go and investigate that. And as she learns, the building is kind of unique because it's storing this nitrate film, which was a really commonly used film in photography and film from about 1900 to 1950. And it's a really wonderful medium to capture image, except it's very difficult to preserve it. And in fact, it starts to deteriorate very quickly. And when it deteriorates, it off-gasses and creates extremely combustible gases that make it very dangerous. And so nitrate film fires are very dangerous because they burn and burn and burn, and they can't be extinguished. And so what archives have done to manage this, to try to preserve this while being safe, is they've built separate buildings to preserve the nitrate. So anyway, so Kate finds herself in this building that's quite creepy because it's all these tiny little vaults, and it's like a bunker really. And there has been an apparent suicide, so she starts to investigate it and quickly realizes that she doesn't think it is a suicide. The cops disagree with her, so there's some friction there. She decides to investigate on her own with the help of a friendly young archivist who's also eager to discover the truth. And in their mystery solving, they realize that there are connections to the past that they need to untangle in order to solve the murder in the present day.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really good.
I get excited about the archives part and then forget to talk about the murder part.
One of the things that I really loved about your book was how the mystery is so grounded in the inner workings of the archive. Like it's the two can't exist without each other. It's so good. you take poor Kate into some really dark territory. She's grieving. She has a drinking problem. She is a chain smoker. Her father is terrible. Oh my gosh, I was yelling at him when I was reading it. And she makes some really bad self-sabotaging decisions. There's a party scene, you guys. It's like every nightmare of drunken behavior you've ever had come true. Poor Kate. Why are you so mean to Kate?
I have had readers ask me that. I think, yeah, people really bond with her, and then do get upset with what she has to go through. So why am I so mean to her? Because I think I was trying to capture what it's like that when you are unmoored, and she's before the book even opens, I tried to sort of convey that she's not in a super healthy place. And as the book is opening, she's dealing, as you said, with this major loss. That her brother has died. That's not a spoiler. It's right at the very beginning. So her brother has died in this very unexpected way, and she is in deep, deep grief. And she doesn't have a lot of skills or support systems to help her with that at the outset. And so what I wanted to explore is what happens when you don't have those skills and you don't have that support, and you sort of, you're on the precipice and you make bad decisions. And I've made bad decisions, and I've seen people make those bad decisions around me. So I wanted to be true to that, but I also wanted to capture that she doesn't quite go all the way, and this case actually helps her. It kind of grounds her and gives her a slightly productive way to kind of channel that. And so I wanted to explore that as well, but I wanted to be true to the fact that we don't always make the right decision. And not only do we don't always make the right decision, but we don't always learn from our mistakes, and we repeat ourselves. We repeat the bad decision again and again until and maybe we're able to break that pattern. And so that's what I was trying to get at, is how self-destructive we can be, and you're still lovable, and you're still worthy, and you still have lots of value, but you're kind of in a mess. And that's what I wanted to capture.
I mean, I love a messy detective 100%. The thing that I really enjoyed about your book is that usually that's a man, right? We have like the stereotypical rumpled, out of control, but still lovable and somehow charming male detective. And I love so much that Kate is a woman and she's equally as, charming and lovable, and you root for her even when she's making such bad decisions. So the story opens with her finding this body in the archive. And I love the procedural details. You got really into the nitty-gritty of like what her job entails. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you came to have that knowledge and why it was important for you to have her like procedural work on the page?
Yeah, I think I am interested in work because I also like to sort of show how the archives works and how being a coroner works. And I think it is really interesting. Everybody's got a story to tell, and what we spend most of our day doing, there are interesting nuggets usually that you can highlight. So that's what I guess I hadn't realized, but I think I have an interest in doing that. For Kate, I, as a mystery writer, have the great good fortune of having a sister who is a coroner. And so,
oh my God, your family is like perfect for mystery writing.
If you weren't already a mystery writer, you would have had to become
I basically
one.
would have to, because Susie will come over for dinner sometimes after a shift, and she's also an emergency room doctor, but she'll come over and she'll, of course she never shares any details or is inappropriate, but sometimes she just needs to unload like, oh boy, this thing happened. And so I, for many years, have heard some stories, and like my little brain is just like, woo. So I was really lucky. I wanted to use Susie's knowledge. She was so generous and helpful. And so I was able to write those scenes and then check in with her. Sometimes I tweak some things, and I probably got some stuff wrong. So don't in any way hold my sister up for, it's all on me. But yeah, that's how I was able to do that.
Okay, last question about Speak for the Dead before you get to talk about the book you're recommending today, which I'm very excited about. The ending is very satisfying, but also hints that there might be more in store for Kate. Is there going to be another book in the series, and can you tell us anything about it?
Yes, I'm so excited. There is going to be another book. The Foulest Things featured a different protagonist, Jess, and then Kate came in for this book, and we'll have Kate again in the next book. It's called Honor the Dead. It'll be out next spring, and it'll feature some of the same characters we've seen in both books. We'll be making appearances now, sort of bringing the two worlds slowly together in Honor the Dead.
Awesome. That's great.
Okay. Yeah, I'm excited for it.
Are you ready to share?
I am, yeah.
I'm very excited about this.
Do I just launch in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great.
Here, I'll give you the graphic
that's what
if you
happens
want.
when you're on the podcast. It's like, oh, I have to talk about my book
Oh,
now.
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you got the good cover. I see.
Yeah.
That's terrific. Yeah, so I was so excited to be asked to recommend a book about an archivist. And so immediately, without hesitation, I thought of Bear, which is by Marian Engel. It was written in 1976. It's a Canadian novel, and in fact, won Canada's most prestigious literary award, the Governor General's Award. So despite the extreme salaciousness of this cover, this is actually, a well-studied literary work the reason I know about it is when I was doing my undergrad, I was studying Canadian literature, and this was on the syllabus. So
amazing.
And it's this fantastic, very slim novel, easy to read. We'll talk about sense of place. It's about this young archivist who is sent up north. She works for a historical institute. She's sent north of Toronto into the sort of cottage country wilderness, because the Institute has been bequeathed this amazing house on an island, and the house is filled with incredible books from the 17th to the 20th century. And so she's meant to go out there, catalog the contents, kind of get the lay of the land, and then figure out if the Institute can use the house for, conferences or something. And so that's her remit. That's what she's meant to do. And she gets out there, and lo and behold, as part of the package of this house, there is a bear. And he's an old bear. He's a sort of half-tame bear that has always been on the island. And at the end of the summer, the bear is going to be taken away to live out the rest of his berry life. And again, very short novel, but packed, because you get this woman who you realize is sort of lonely and a little bit lost, and she's trying to find herself. She's very excited about her work, and she loves books, and she's deeply involved in cataloging the books, and she's delighted to have this isolated space. She becomes friendly with the bear. She becomes friendlier with the bear. But it's not salacious, and it feels. There is some bestiality, but Engel does it in such a way that it doesn't, of course, feel normal or natural, but it sort of feels a little inevitable. It doesn't creep you out the way that it should, but at the same time, you are not, nor are you on board. You understand this is a problematic thing that's happening, but it's also fascinating how it's done, because it only sort of that part of the relationship only develops at the end of the book. Again, a very short book. So you're sort of leading up to it. It's so brilliant how it's done. And then the book is also really funny. And Lou is this character. Talk about rooting for a character. Like, she is a mess, but she's so interesting, and she's so brave in many ways. So you're rooting for her to find happiness, and you're like, well, if she wants to,
if it's a bear,
it's maybe it's okay, but of course it also isn't. So all of that gets explored. It's this setting, as I said, is sort of northern Ontario, Canada. Engel captures like the bugs and the heat and the wonderfulness of swimming in crisp, cold lakes and rivers. Like, the descriptions of the landscape are really evocative and immersive. It's got this, it's 70s, so it's got that great 70s sort of feminist slant to it of body hair and grumpiness. It's just fantastic. She also is exploring somehow in this slim book, like, you know, the characters, the progress and her development from being lost to sort of finding part of herself, how we project things onto animals, how we mythologize nature in ways that can be really destructive and problematic. Colonialism is in there, and like impacts of European settlement on the wild and what rights Europeans have, that European settlement has, misogyny, sexism. It's all packed into this funny, weird book. And I did get a quote. It's dedicated to her therapist. The book is dedicated to her therapist, which is amazing.
And I found to talk about her bear obsession.
Here is a picture of the nice lady who wrote the bear porn right there.
She's so cute.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah. No, I do love her. And unfortunately she died quite young. So you know, she's got about 6 or 7 books, novels out there. But then she's sort of, and she's a contemporary of Margaret Atwood. And in fact, Margaret Atwood's first novel, Surfacing, has a lot of that same. If you're familiar, that's also a story of a woman who goes into the wilderness and kind of finds herself. There's a lot of thematic crossover there. So it's a fantastic book. And the New Yorker wrote a piece about it. As I was researching for this, I saw that in, I think, 2020 or 2021, there's a great article from someone talking about bear. So that's awesome. Might be of interest as well.
Amazing. You did it.
Really
you introduced us all to a treasure on the show.
You can read it in an afternoon. And then think about it for weeks.
For the rest of your life.
Or the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great. Okay, so it is 3:48. We were supposed to enter Q&A at 3:50. That's 2 minutes. 2 minutes is not really enough time to go through 5 books. I think maybe we should let the audience decide.
Yes.
So, okay, so fork 1 is we run through 5 books and we have a short QA. Fork 2 is we just go directly through to QA right now, so we have more time for that. If you like the first one, books, short QA, press 1. If you like the second one, more QA now, press 2.
Books. People are saying books.
People are saying books.
These readers want
Awesome
books.
books. Yes.
You readers want books. Big surprise
So,
there.
Dave.
All
I'm
right.
just gonna butt in for a sec. We are limited in time, so let's do a very quick run through for the books.
Okay.
And thank you so much.
We'll do that. All right, here we go. This is going to be exciting. All right.
Deep breath.
If you want to chase the thrill of archives for books that have 5 titles you might find interesting, we start with 3 novels that take place in an archive. Our first one is The Last Watchman of Old Cairo by Michael David Lucas. All of the characters are in different timelines and they have a connection to this is a historical fiction. It's set in Egypt in 3 different time frames, the 11th century, 1897, and now. All of the main characters have a connection to a sacred scroll hidden in a secret attic in a synagogue in Old Cairo. It's got magical realism and characters you'll love hanging out with, and a deep passion for learning. That is the Last Watchman of Old Cairo.
I will say that if you read that book, you will want to hug it. It's that kind of book.
This is The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. We mention this book literally every chance we get. It is a well-told, thrilling book about featuring ancient archives and a vampire librarian. If that gets your attention, get yourself to a bookstore or a library right now. It begins with a teenage girl finding a collection of old letters and a mysterious book in her father's library. It turns out he's been researching Dracula, maybe not as a legend, and he disappears shortly thereafter, and she goes looking at him in an epic quest through Europe. It's a lovely book. Book 3, The Weight of Ink, also a lovely book. This is a historical novel about 2 amazing women who live centuries apart. The first is Esther. She's a Portuguese Jewish woman in 1600s London. She is a scribe for a blind rabbi. And then there's Helen, who is a modern British historian. She has recently discovered a cache of 17th century documents. Guess who wrote them? And they might change how scholars understand Jewish life in the 17th century. There is a lot of historical detail in this book that'll take you into 17th century London, and it will also talk about the academic world of modern scholars. If you like the idea of heated arguments and feverish debate in a rare manuscript room, this might be your book. It also has things to say about history and righteous feminist fury and the value of relentless empathy. So that's The Weight of Ink. And then finally, we're going to wrap with 2 nonfiction books that are archives in the form of a book, which is one of my favorite kind of books, the museum that you can carry around with you. It's an excellent bit of magic. This first one is The Gorgeous Nothings, Emily Dickinson's Envelope Poems by Emily Dickinson and edited by Jen Bervin and Marta Werner. Say what you will about her mental health, Emily Dickinson knew how to keep her ass in a chair. In her 55 years, she wrote somewhere between 1,700 and 2,400 poems. Scholars can't quite agree on the count. If you spot her first 12 years of life for learning how to walk and read and stuff like that, that is 1 a week, every week for the course of her life. And of course, she was known for writing on tiny scraps of paper, the backs of envelopes and receipts and such. This book is poster size, and it recreates these bits of paper life size. So it feels like you could lift them off of the page. And there's also scholarly commentary for context, but maybe that doesn't get in the way of the beauty of the work itself. And then finally, we need to talk, here's a sketch that she did as well. Finally, we need to talk about Taschen. Taschen is a publisher of art books, or as I'd like to call them, picture books for grown-ups. Taschen has a very long series of these books. Some celebrate artists like Annie Leibovitz or Caravaggio. Some celebrate types of art like science illustration or package design. And some celebrate things like this one, the circus. The circus 1870s to 1950s will take you on a parade through the history of the American circus. It has delightful posters and photos. There's commentary written by a ringmaster and circus historians. The editors of this book searched through 300,000 images in collections and private archives to boil it down to the 900 in this book. If you open this book, you will smell the popcorn and hear the elephants trumpet. I should mention there's 2 sizes of this book. There's a big 15 by 10 inch size and a smaller 8 by 6 inch size. You do not want the smaller one. Get the big one, treat yourself, or visit your local library. You will want the full experience. Those are 5 books we love that have a strong sense of an archive.
Virtual day. To our audience, thanks for coming, and we hope you'll join us for some other events. This will be on our website, on the Newburyport Literary Festival website, in the coming weeks, so you can check it out again. And thank you all again so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, all. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.